Hello and welcome to our Research Network reading group. I am Tavian Hunter. I'm the archive and library manager at Innova, and my colleague Samina is also here with us tonight. She's our program coordinator. And today's reading group is the 8th event in our Research Network series entitled Global Revisions. We're essentially kind of like looking back at Innova's founding ideas and reflecting on the concept of globalization and new internationalism. So this reading group is specifically linked to a talk that's going to happen next month with our researcher Xiaoyi and artist Choy, who are also present with us today. And they're going to present their talk called The Vicissitudes of Crossing Borders, Temporal Experience in the Geopolitical Landscape of London, Hong Kong, and Mainland China. So this reading group serves as a space to consider how the discourse around how migration between these places and the West across different generations has developed over the years, and how this has been entangled with internationalism, identity politics, globalizations through the selected texts that we're going to be reading today. So I'm going to hand over to Xiaoyi to kind of provide a bit of context around their research and also about the text. But before we do that, I would like everybody to kind of introduce themselves. Maybe you want to mention the place that you're in, because I know we're in different places at the moment, and just tell us about why you're attending the reading group. I'll give everybody about 30 seconds, so great to hear who's here today.
Afternoon, hello, lovely to be here. My name's Thomas Dukes. I'm a postgrad researcher at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm based in Liverpool. My research looks at how curatorial activity can help inform the future of an institution. So I'm interested in critical curatorial activity, sort of as defined by Stefan Nowotny, and how that can play a part in understanding what an institution has held to be important and questioning how that can be important or whether it can be important in the future.
I'll go. I normally wait about 3 seconds before I speak, yeah, my name's Ji Xian. I'm based in Leicester. I'm an independent arts curator, mentor, producer, work with a lot of students. I've been the associate director of Attenborough Arts Centre, and I was one of 20 Arts Council funded changemakers, which was addressing the lack of diversity and senior leadership in the arts. I'm currently working mostly independently, and one of my current commissions is the City Ambassador for UK New Artists. And I'm very much about art as the purveyor of meaning and not purely an entertainment industry. And, you know, being a person of colour, I hate making that point, but nevertheless, here I am as such. What Innova does is incredibly important to my work, and a lot of the people that I work with have worked in collaboration with Innova in the past, so it's very nice to be able to have some insight. I'll shut up now.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Yamana. I'm from the drawing room, where I'm the librarian, and we're really interested in interrogating curatorial practices as well, and also expanding these to include more young people at drawing room, and sort of diversifying who gets to curate what happens at drawing room. So we're just at the beginning of that process, and yeah, so we're really interested to see what comes out of this session.
Thank you. I have been to several exhibitions in the drawing room. I think one was curated by Rebecca Harold. Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you.
Hi, I can go next. I'm also from the drawing room working with Yamana. My name is Shamali, and I work on the engagement team there. And yeah, we're kind of developing a new young people's program that's trying to look at critiquing curatorial practices, and we thought this looks really great. So yeah, excited to be here. And I've been to an Innova reading group before, but in person, and it was really good. It was about ecology and the environment, and yeah, it was really, really good. So yeah, I have big hopes for this one as well. Thanks.
Nice to see you again.
I can go next if it's all right. So hi, I'm Alessandra. I'm based in London. I'm a project manager for the Bagri Foundation that supports Asian artists across the globe. And also I have my curatorial practice. I'm the founder of Performing Borders. There is a curatorial research platform that investigates different levels of borders, intersectional borders in the performing arts. Thank you. I'm here because I'm really, really interested in the text and and the discussion that will come after. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn from Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's about 6 a.m. here, which is why you don't see me on camera. Yeah, so I'm an independent curator and have been following the center's work for a while, and am also interested in critiquing and looking more closely at curatorial practice, and that's why I'm here. Glad to see you all.
Thank you for getting up so early. Yeah, that's really a big effort.
Hi, I can go next. I'm Steph. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a writer and editor from Hong Kong. I'm half British, half Chinese. So I'm very interested in concepts of crossing borders and the production of the global within the contemporary art worlds.
I can go next. I'm Sam Park. I am an event manager at Lux. Lux is a moving image agency that supports and promotes moving image art practices. Innova is friend organization of Lux, and I really enjoyed Xiaoyi's podcast with Chloe Austin. So I was really interested in hearing more about different research area that Xiaoyi is doing. So yeah, very looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. That's a really big encouragement. I also want to promote your newsletter. Lux have been doing great newsletter on moving images, and I always follow it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just want to mention we are kind of on furlough, and our weekly newswire is on pause until the end of February, but our monthly newswire is going out every month.
Thank you. And I'll put the podcast that you mentioned in the chat if anyone's interested as well.
Hi, I can say hello. I'm Angela Chan, and I'm interested in race and climate change. I curate as Worm Art and Ecology, and also run the London Chinese Science Fiction group, and co-direct the London Science Fiction Research Community.
I'm in that group. I think I've seen.
So yeah, it's really nice to kind of like be in this group. Hi Tavian, and really happy with all the things that Innova does, and like profiling a lot of great work to do with race, especially as diaspora based in UK. Also Hong Kong diaspora here.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. Angela is one of our previous research network participants.
Hi everyone, I can go if you can hear me. I'm using my phone, so it's a bit out of I don't know, technical difficulties. So I'm David Morris. I work at After All as a researcher, and I lead a research master's program in exhibition studies. So it's really great to be here and see some friendly faces. I work with Bo at After All, and I was very interested in the readings for this session, and I'm excited for the sort of follow-up session next month as well. So hi everyone, happy to be here.
Thank you, David. I also want to promote After All's new book, like the uncooperative contemporaries. It's about art exhibitions in Shanghai in 2000, so including the Shanghai Biennial. and also some other peripheral exhibitions like Fuck Off. Yeah.
Thank you. Looks like I have a new book for the Stuart Hall Library now. Is that everybody who would like to speak? It's quite a lot of us. I'm sure we'll get opportunities for everybody to participate. I'm just going to hand over to Xiaoyi and she'll introduce herself. Thank you.
Hello, and I am Xiaoyi, but my surname, like if you call me in Chinese, is Nie Xiaoyi. Yeah, so you can call me Xiaoyi, or you can also, like, one of my friends call me Xiao Nie. It's also one way to call me. It's just basically in Chinese, that's how you can call young people like that. Yeah. And I'm a researcher in exhibition history in China, and also interested in curatorial methodology. So previously, I also have been working with artists, sometimes doing projects, but it has been like a long time since my last project, because in the past over 3 years, I have been doing a PhD in Royal College of Art. And this PhD is a case study. So that's actually related to the first text today we are going to read. So the case study is into the project Long March, Long March, a walking visual display. It was in 2000 and curated by 2002, curated by Lu Jie and another curator called Choy. So it's like co-curated project. But this project was first raised in 1999 in Goldsmiths in London, because it was part of the like the work submission for MA called, at that time, called Fine Art Administration and Curatorship. So it was one of the earliest like degree in curating. So another one was in UK is the RCA one. And so after this submission, like Lu Jie didn't just put it off. Like he began like a 3-year period of developing it. So from 1999 to 2002, he devoted a lot of time in it to develop the curatorial proposal into a 20 site. So this proposal is quite interesting. It is a very detailed one, and the original idea is to have a 20 site like exhibition, screening, symposium, so a long series over a long period of time along the historic road of the Red Army's Long March. So if you're not sure about like what is Long March, it is actually during the 1930s. It's part of the Chinese Civil War, actually, because at that time, the 1934, like the Communist Party was enclosed by the Kuomintang's army. And so basically Kuomintang was trying to erase the power of the Communist Party. And then the Communist Party took it's a flight to escape from this military attack. And then they left their base in Jiangxi province, and then began like a march, but without any destination. So it was like exploration, like trying to survive. And then during like about 2-year period, they have traveled many different provinces and eventually end up in Yan'an. So this kind of a very legendary military action later became like a very important metaphor for the Chinese, because eventually it was the Communist Party who seized the power and established the modern Chinese People's Republic of China. Yeah, and so this Long March has been a very important memory, narrative, as also like a metaphor for the success. And also you can almost say this is a founding legend for the new China. Yeah, so it has been retold again in films, like articles and so on. But basically Lu Jie took this metaphor and also this narrative and developed into a collective project, not in Beijing or Shanghai's professional white cube spaces, and they exhibited a lot in these social spaces, or at that time they called it as alternative spaces. Yeah, and it took on like a way of open call and invitation, and over 100 artists, Chinese artists and international artists, participated in it. There was some like big names like Judy Chicago. She and her husband went to like a very ethnic minority area, like Luguhu, that's the Shangri-La area. So there are many interesting events and activities in this very big project. And today, like, I'm not going to too much into my take on this because that's going to be in the February part. But today we are going to read an article that's called The Paradox of a Curatist. Oh, sorry. The Paradox of a Curatist was written in 2005. It was actually it was first published in a journal on curating called Manifesta. So it is the 5th issue of Manifesta, and the whole issue is about discussing like the curating, what is curating. And also it's quite interesting, 2005 is kind of a moment when the discussion around curatorial has emerged. And also this is related to like the Goldsmiths program, because I think Ivy Rogoff, series Ivy Rogoff influenced that program a lot. And also at that time, Anna Hardy, another like curator who founded this program, they all had an idea of curating is not like as a service for the museums. It's not like the original traditional idea about conservation. Curating for them is more like an approach to express. It's a creative approach for expression. So when looking at this article, we can see Lu Jie had like, I think he is trying to speak to like that, or like it's not conservative idea. It's like the more conventional idea about what is curating, and also especially about the relation. It's something very contentious relation between artist and curator. If we look at the other articles in the 5th issue of Manifesta, we can find actually many of these articles are discussing this very competitive relation between curators and artists, because after the 1990s, the 1990s was a time when like star curator like Hans Rich Obrist has came into view, and so that become a very important phenomenon. Yeah, and then here I think Lu Jie was trying to it is about to thinking about the exhibition culture at that time, and also especially about what is the relation inside an art project. Yeah, and how to position the curator and artist. Yeah. So here I will share my screen here.
Yeah, and while Xiaoyi's doing that, I'm just going to say, like, in the kind of spirit of interconnectivity, we're going to ask if everyone can read a paragraph each. I hope you can all see the screen. Let us know if it's too small or anything like that. But yeah, just to kind of get through the text, we're going to ask everybody to read a paragraph each, and then we're going to stop, I think, halfway through to kind of discuss a little bit, and then at the end as well. Just a little disclaimer, this reading group is designed to be a supportive and peer-led space for thinking and learning together. and to have a kind of constructive disagreements, but also critical engagement. So we just ask everybody to have mutual respect for one another, interest and care as well. And if you have any questions while reading, you just put them in the chat for us, and one of us will kind of like reply to you, either in the chat or verbally. And when someone else is reading, please just make sure that you're on mute just to limit the background interference. And we're going to try and not pick on anybody, but it'd be great if you can nominate yourself to read, either by putting your name in the chat or openly jumping in. So I'm actually going to nominate Samina to start reading for us.
Thanks. Okay, so let's get into it. So the paradox of the curatist, the Long March's author. The complaint that contemporary art is tired stems largely from the view that exhibitions are tired. The problem is not only one of star curators. It is also related to the fact that artists have been adopting a strategic approach to the current system of mega exhibitions, as well as to the wariness and insipid language of art criticism throughout the entire globalized art system. The crisis in curating is a global phenomenon, and it is particularly visible in the contemporary art world of China. The appearance of curating in the 1990s was strongly tied to the experience of innovative experimental art and the collective collaboration between curators and a handful of provocative experimental artists. Today, in the slew of trendy curatorial projects, this type of approach is rarely visible. Instead, curatorial strategies are based on calculated and unequivocally careerist aspirations. While it appears as if artists and curators support each other, the end result is that art creation has become completely dependent on thematic group mega shows that feature a lofty curatorial subject, a loose and spatially incoherent grouping of artworks, and a lack of sincere curatorial thinking and critique. The careerist approach always uses reality as a condition, is always compromising, and is unable to creatively break through borders and boundaries. Consequently, the entire process of making and exhibiting art has become a power struggle for authorship, which drives both artists and curators as productionists and exhibitionists. Would anybody else like to go next?
I can go next. In this era of exhibitions, there has also been a strengthening of exchanges and gatherings, which have increased the differences and reduced the similarities of our identities. We have all noticed a very evident change in the art practice of different regions, namely the construction of subjectivity from the international by turning it into the local. But apart from competing to construct a large-scale exhibition, an art market and a museum system, or imposing international standards, or transplanting the powers of the curator and the collision between modernity and tradition, this process has also revealed the different experiences and conditions of the local context. It was from this start on the Long March in 1999. We departed in the summer of 2002 and are still on the road today. The Long March is both a concrete series of display events along the route of the Red Army's historic 6,000-mile trek through China, 1934 to 1936, and a presence in the art world in and beyond China, which aims to establish a new consciousness of art in relation to history, culture, and memory. It seeks to interrogate the revolutionary memory of the people and the artists it works with, to make a revolutionary departure from the standard art world praxis, and to stand in a revolutionary relation to a group of artists, all through an action of indeterminate duration.
Thank you. I apologize for my, how do you call that? Like bad moving in the windows. Is there anyone next one to
I'd like to volunteer.
Thank you.
The Long March is a metaphor. It is an exercise in international cooperation. It is a campaign, and it is a complex art project, which is subtitled A Walking Visual Display. It is a journey. Its participants are artists, theorists, art activists, and the general public, some from abroad, but for the most part Chinese. It uses the historical Long March as a geographic and discursive framework, and the curatorial plan parallels the grand narrative and romantic ideas of the Long March, that of turning failure into success, taking to the road in a search for utopia, funding an alternative democratic society through engagement with the masses, leaders, and soldiers, representing both intellectuals and the people, examining important theories and tactics through the lens of reality in a local context, and generating a new and powerful praxis, which ultimately lead to the founding of the present Chinese state. The working model created by the historical Long March provides us with not only a subject to discuss, but a substantive praxis for critique of contemporary mainstream exhibition culture. Chinese contemporary art is still in the earliest stages of constructing a formal system for itself, but it has already begun the game of comparison and competition with the West, buying wholeheartedly into a system based on major museums and biennial exhibitions. We must think more carefully about the structural relationship of this system to the global artistic hierarchy. We need to remain sensitive and respectful to the situation of alternative art in peripheral locals. Otherwise, a Chinese art system that takes as its slogan, oppose discursive hegemony, will in reality be nothing more than a tool of neo-colonialism. The Long March looks to integrate in a single scene the production, consumption, and interpretation of art, three issues that have traditionally remained separate. It looks to overcome the traditional distance between viewer and creator, to close the gap between host and guest, and to seek a new understanding of space. In this way, the Long March merges exhibition with creation and allows consumption production to interact. It is not about the opposition between the local and the international or their exchange. Rather, it is about the interactive translation and the inheritance of the revolutionary nature of the internationalization of the local and the localization of the international.
Thank you, Yamuna. Is there anyone want to be the next one?
I can read. Curating, in the sense we are using the word in the Long March, has always been a method for producing work. Curators have always had a strong relationship to the work, and the two have been entwined together since the beginning. The first step we took was to make the spaces of the Long March both physical and discursive, thereby revealing a series of dialogues with and within these spaces. Not only did we disrupt the relationship between curators and artists by using the identity of the artist to become project director for hundreds of projects grouped together in one project, the Long March, but also by the fact that both artists and their works became part of the Long March, both as authors and as a piece of an artwork. Artists as curators and curators as artists mutually helped each other in their development. A distinction must be made, however, between two forms that the artist-curator relationship may take. One is to model the identity of the artist in order to make an exhibition. The other is to organize an exhibition that breaks down the concepts of curating an artwork, so that the entire walking visual display appears as an artwork that conflicts with other works in the exhibition. Furthermore, this conflict is not an attempt to superficial critique, Rather, it is a conflict between power and interpretation. In the endless variety of art activities on the Long March, there are scholars as artists, artists as curators or social workers and researchers, audiences as participants and even as collaborators. Collaboration and participation must accordingly adjust in order to accommodate the variegated and different positions that each individual set out from. When curators began using exhibitions to criticize perceptions of space, materials, or art history, they became more and more like artists. Their exhibitions became their creative works, as well as a medium for expressing their perspectives, which was similar to the approach artists took toward their work.
Thank you both. Anyone want to read the next paragraph?
I can.
Thank you.
The Long March is a grand narrative and a grand ambition, but because our revolutionary curatorial ideas has not always been collectively recognised by artists, we have encountered both resistance and support. We have talked with several hundreds of artists and held several meetings and press conferences over recent years. Although we gained the support of provincial artists, we encountered much resistance from elite artists in the centre who felt threatened by us, as if the project were being directed against them, while in actuality their participation was needed to reform our art community. We also debated whether we should ignore established artists and only work with the grassroots. But because artists have already been made to think in terms of the international context, we ended up with works that saw the Long March only as another exhibition opportunity. Often the curators would be faced with a situation where they had no alternative but to take the place of the artist. For example, names Long March installation, Long March happenings, and Long March events, all referring to things produced by the curators, were coined to describe events that arose out of the Long March project, but which did not have a definite author. The project also included several important collaborations with the community. However, artists were often unwilling to participate since they were more accustomed to counterfeit interactions with the community. In this regard, only the Long March could fill this gap.
Thank you. I think it's worth to, I want to provide some background information here because like in the past several paragraphs, Lu Jie have mentioned a lot about the international opportunities or exhibition opportunity. This was also a critique or response to especially in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were many exhibitions in Europe and in the US on like the phenomenon like Chinese contemporary art. This was related to the multiculturalism policy, diversity policy in Europe at that time, in the cultural field, and so many Chinese artists at that time, they didn't have like the chance of public exhibitions in China, or most exhibitions were like only lasted for 1 day or 2 days, and then the audience were mainly internal insiders to show to other Chinese artists. But then like they enjoy more and more exhibition opportunities in the like international exhibition in the biennials and the museums. And so this was seen by Lu Jie as a very critical problem because it led to many so-called strategy, like playing national identity card, like using the symbols of Chinese or Oriental symbols. And then this will lead to like a dislocation of the art. And so at that time in the late 1990s, there were several art movements. I think especially the most obvious one was called 后感性, post-sensuality. And then that was especially against the idea of using symbol, political or cultural symbol in the art, and using conceptual like they call it like bad conceptual art. And so here, Lu Jie was also trying to say like this Long March was seen by him as a way to disrupt and change people's idea. Yeah. I can read the next paragraph. Yeah. The open movement of spaces, very often resulting from challenge and uncertainty, has had an enormous impact on curatorial methods in the Long March. The relationship between artists and curators has changed along with changes in the relationships between artists, works, and exhibitions, and between works, exhibitions, and audiences. In fact, the conflict between theory and practice has opened up the relationship between the artist's works and the exhibitions, and from the curatorial perspective, has opened up the relationship between exhibitions and works. Regardless of whether the exhibition was challenging ways of viewing or challenging art history, whether it was interactive or sought to expand notions of what is art, these themes require greater cooperation between artists and curators. And the methods for exhibiting art led to artists and curators both becoming the authors of the exhibition. Advances in the field of visual culture achieved by critical theory have led to curating being not only about showing work, but also about emphasizing the creative actions involved in a complicated exchange. During the Long March, art and life could not be separated, and therefore the curator's roles in expression and exchange began to overlap substantially with those of artists, even to the point where they began to replace artists. All of this touches on the question of authorship. Anyone want to read the next paragraph?
I can do that. Can I ask you for it to be a bit bigger? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Is this fine?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. So
okay. Let me try to put the whole paragraph here.
Oh, thanks so much. If the author of the exhibition is the curator and the author of the art is the artist, we are left with a paradox. In reality, the shift from exhibitions to the working visual displays has made artists no longer artists in the traditional sense of the word. Their primary job has become similar to that of curators. In the limited discursive and physical spaces of the Long March, there is no white cube or tabula rasa in the minds of artists and curators. These spaces are filled with the selection of a strategy and with self-evaluation. As such, both curating and creating works for the Long March have become a form of cultural rhetoric. For by extending or challenging the definition of exhibition and the definitions of exchange, creative endeavors now construct a mutually imagined and realistic schedule for the work and its ultimate installation site. The project has often confronted the problem of artist strategizing. Artists did not want to miss out on the Long March, but many were too busy with their international schedules and therefore only contributed works without helping to realize them. Also, because the team was traveling, practice will often conflict with curatorial plans, leaving the curatorial team with no other option than to assume the role of the artist. In this way, artists yielded some of their autonomy to the curators. The dilemma was that the curator must not only play the part of the author, but also the inseparable role of the curator who as a part author was both exploited and rejected by artists. This is because in our world, the relationship between the curator and the author of the work is in name only. Some artists' proposals and actual works, too, aimed at challenging the curator's intervention, and these works powerfully address such issues. Other artists, however, felt threatened by the open structure of the project and chose not to participate. Indeed, there was very strong resistance to the Long March.
The greatest contribution made by the Long March has been the changes it introduced as we moved along the road. Confronted by different regions and cultural systems, the display politics of the Long March opened up a complex and diverse space. The originally closed relationship between artists and local contexts was transformed into an experience of mobility, which has been even more in need of mediation by curators. Although ultimately the process is still characterized by assimilation, at the very least it is beginning to move. The sharing of knowledge and networks has also brought more efforts at translation and greater hybridity. The common ground of knowledge is moving. While we are aware that the art system has problems, we are neither careerists who rush to adopt its ways nor radicals who seek to abandon it. Rather, we have been striving to create an alternative system by examining our own problems. From the beginning, the Long March has confronted the crisis of the curator, the crisis of art, the crisis of authorship, striving to peel back layer by layer, both from a walking visual display that includes both form, a walking visual display that includes exhibitions, residencies, symposiums, lectures, community reform, social surveys, visual economy, publishing, and the construction of a concrete artistic organizational space, and movement without limits, continually developing. In our art practice, we embody all types of contradictions and conflicts. Through the use of collective narratives and the construction and loss of the individual, what the Long March structure reveals is that curators are not curators, nor are they artists, nor are artists artists. Rather, it is the exhibition that is the artist. All the participants reassume the status of cultural workers. The sheer vastness of the Long March, with its alliances and its struggles, has created a relationship between curators and artists that is the work of the Long March. It opposes centralization through a moving network. It achieves a new understanding of locality, replacing and inverting physical and psychological boundaries. And it creates a new systemic form that does not rely on the system. The Long March is a China without borders, one that extends beyond the boundaries of the nation state. It transcends the canonical exhibition form, constructing complex and multiple hypertexts, an author beyond the substance. The Long March has itself become a work of art, as well as the author of the work of art. Curators and artists alike are authors, and the works are the authors of the exhibition, with no time frame, no beginning, and no ending.
Thank you. This is a final paragraph. Anyone want to be the last one? I can read the final paragraph. Okay. From the start, the Long March has been on the march, both internationally and locally. A recent Long March project at the local level was the Great Survey of Paper Cuttings in Yanchuan County, which did not involve any type of artist participation. For this reason, the Long March curatorial and administrative team worked for half a year with the Yanchuan County government and over 80 volunteers to conduct a comprehensive survey of the 180,000 people of Yanchuan County. The result was 15,006 individual case studies and their associated paper cutting works. This entire endeavor has come to be seen as a field project that unites anthropology, sociology, and art in one activity. At the same time, it was also gigantic artwork, which was exhibition simultaneously as the Shanghai Biennial and the Taipei Biennial, with the author being none other than the Long March itself. Another recent development of the Long March has been the emergence in 2004 of the formulation artist/author equals curatist, which entered the international space as an independent project. In 2005, the Long March has already accepted invitations to 3 biennial and triennial exhibitions, replacing the usual procedure of having a national museum and an independent curator organize contemporary Chinese art exhibitions, and even replacing the artist in directly receiving invitations. The Long March is able to curate exhibitions that form artworks, but at the same time, it can also be an author and participate in exhibitions in and of itself. So this is the article, 9 paragraph. I want to ask first, like, do you have any initial thought, like after reading this?
I'd like to say that the idea of, in the final paragraph, the concept of curatist makes a lot of sense to me. And pretty much most of the text does actually correspond with how I think and how I would like the world to be. One of my main kind of, I think I said in the introduction, one of the main things I think is that art is nothing special about art in terms of how valuable it is in terms of human activities. I'm not going to say that art is better than accountancy or medicine or gardening. You know, everything has its place and value. But what art does that isn't done by other things is that it has the ability to compact experience and be a purveyor of meaning. And if all the elements that are involved in art and its production, being the technicians, the lighting people, the curators, the artists, the institutions and so on, are all contributing towards this purveying of meaning, then in effect we are all serving this whole big thing, which is an artist. So I think you hit on a very essential point around what the totality of the art world and the arts ecology is. I really value the idea of a curatist being the sort of mediator, the primary mediator, as an interlocutor between all that connects these elements of art and the various organs that contribute to the organization of art.
Thank you. I'm interested, like, so you are an independent curator, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right, I remember that. Have you thought about if you are a participant in the Long March project, if you are in an artist status, and now, would you mind, like, now, like, there's anyone telling you, like, you are not the artist, like the exhibition is actually the artist?
I personally, because I don't have an ego, I genuinely wouldn't mind on a very kind of natural human level. Secondly, I reinforce what you're saying, and I think the art is the artist. One of the models I talk about is, yes, an artist makes a piece of work and it is therefore presented. Here's my artwork, have a look at it. But I am now, as the artist, an audience of that artwork now. I'm no longer able to say that I'm just the artist. I have to stand and look at it this way at it. And then when an audience member looks at that artwork, they are also creating the work in their own mind. They may not have, you know, chiseled Michelangelo's David and tooled it and made the painting themselves, but they are creating in that moment their experiencing of it. Now, what is the powerful element in all of that? It is the artwork. The artwork exists in order to cause the artist to make it and cause the audience to remake it or make it in their own experience. So yes, absolutely, the artist, the artwork, and therefore the exhibition as a collection of artworks, as an extension of that, is the art, and therefore the artist. We are all serving the artwork, and it serves us. It becomes, yeah, it becomes more fluid and yeah, it's quite an infinite loop of a dance, and who is unrecognizable ultimately. You know, it's a simple, you make the point in essence as well that the institutions don't exist without the artist, and therefore which is more important, you know, but the institutions are more stable and they have the resources and the finances and so on, but it's always the artist, the poor artist, that's struggling. But without the artist, they don't exist, and therefore the art is more important. Sorry, I'm going off on semi-rant that kind of really just echoes your thesis, really. Yeah, I personally wouldn't take it as an affront. I serve the art. I don't. Hilma af Klint is a really good example, who hid her work for, I think, a century. She kind of put it in her will to say that I don't want my work being revealed. She was the head of Kandinsky and everything. Now that her work is out, it is telling us how to read it, and therefore it is the artist.
I think in the authorship, I think that also explains why in the Long March project, there was a very strong focus on non-professional artists, or like outsider artists or folk artists. So there are many artists were found or promoted by the curatorial team who were not in the contemporary art ecology. And they were maybe just doing paper cutting, or they were like self-educated photographers. So in that sense, but it's quite interesting later, this artist, like a photographer called Li Tianbing from Fujian province, he was like the curator Lu Jie said, he became a contemporary artist, and then he attended like Shanghai Biennial, like this contemporary art thing. But I just want to say this is Lu Jie's idea about like the curatist. Like personally, I still have like a distance from this thesis, because this is her, I think this is a very kind of, for me, it's a very romantic view and telling about the collaboration about between the curators and artists, canceling all the identity. Yeah. So
I compare it to the idea of the parents. I use the analogy, I use about 3 or 4 analogies as very strong analogies. One is the one of procreation and you know, human making children and grandchildren and so on, and grandparents and ancestors. I compare the concept to that of a parent. So a parent is a carer, an educator, a cook, a chef, and all these various things. At no given point do we assign the parent a paycheck, you know, to say that you get paid for being a parent. And similarly, a curatist, or you know, anybody in this kind of ecological contributory process, is playing kind of multiple roles, not just the curator or the artist. They're playing audience and producer and painter and various other things. So I think it's yes, there's a kind of, you know, I understand what you mean by the sense of romance and this kind of poetry within it, but it's also the truth that we actually dissolve in these multiple roles constantly as human beings. You know, the curator has to be a writer and a critic at the same time as, you know, potentially buying screwdrivers. So there are many different roles that are happening simultaneously. It's almost impossible to distinguish.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm interested in like any other comments? Is there?
Hi. Thank you. Yeah, I was kind of interested in if maybe we could consider a practical example to position the role of the communities and the audiences in the project. In particular, there's a line in, I'm not sure what paragraph, which looks at the aim of the Long March to integrate the production, consumption and interpretation of art. And that because it was this place in the social spaces, what was were there any methods of like how we refigure this interpretation of art, or how the, like, I suppose it's quite a practical thing, but yeah, how maybe.
I prepare some images and like a one short video clip. Maybe we can have a sense of what it was like on the dynamic, because this article is quite kind of theoretical and playing with concepts. And this is like their website, Long March project website. And so they have many documents on this website. So you can have exploration later. But now I'm just playing like in the video part, they have like a 1 hour documentary film. And here you can have a look. I will just play here. So this is, can you hear the video? This is a curator, Lu Jie, who was the executive curator in this project. And this is a work from cynical realism. This is the voice from Lu Jie. Because at that time, the Antonioni's film was criticized widely in the mice movement, but it was not shown to the Chinese people. And this is a work of artist Cui Jianguo, who was at that time already the head of sculpture in Central Academy of Fine Art. This work, this statue on the ground, was called Marx in China. So this is Karl Marx, but dressed in Mao suit. And this is in Jinggangshan. So it was the mountainous area where Mao Zedong established the military base. So just to give like this rough idea. So I think that sentence for me is also very important, like a combination between I think production, reception. Let me go back to this. Yeah, production, consumption, and interpretation of art. I think this is especially related to one, at that time, many artworks were produced in China, but then transported overseas for overseas audience, and then interpreted by the overseas audience in like a Western, like basically non-local, like cultural context. Yeah, and then like for a very important motivation for the Long March was to bring back art local. And then you can see when these artists were creating artworks like on site and surrounded by these villagers who were not professional art audience. And I think for them, that was like a production, consumption, and interpretation together. And then like the artists were in a very like fast interaction with the local people. But then like, I think there's a idea about once art is out of the studio, from studio to the museum and like the media, which was usually separated in different spaces. But here, like actually in like documenting what was happening on site was also very important for the Long March project. So there was originally one professional documentary film crew following this project. And then the project also had its own videographer. And also it has a very powerful website at that time. And Lu Jie and Choy were trying to write a document called Reports from the Road, to report what is, if they, at that time there was no Twitter or something like that, but the basic idea was the same. They want to update what is happening every day and publish the pictures every day. And so people could follow their progress online. And so it was aimed to be like an international audience, yeah, a lot. So I feel in that sense, actually, then there is also like a separation, like Claire Bishop has discussed in the about participatory art. There's separation between like the primary audience and secondary audience. Here, like there was still like me, I am watching like this we are watching this documentary film like as secondary audience, yeah. Though like there was indeed like I think a wish there to try to cancel the difference between the primary and the secondary audience, yeah.
I find it really interesting that in some ways it preempts a refiguring of cultural audiences in the UK and the sort of the proximity of production, consumption and interpretation that's trying to be positioned as a very local and grounded support. And yeah, in the UK, and I'm thinking of particularly like the most recent Arts Council document and their like emphasis on let's create, and maybe some contemporary critical institutional critique that looks at sort of hierarchies of cultural institutions as being separated. Yeah, it's really interesting. And then I go back to that highlighted paragraph above and think about the game of comparison and competition with the West, and how that this, like, or certainly in the UK, that system seems to have sort of echoed what was going on in the Long March there, and whether that again will become another kind of a system which distances itself again, kind of thing. It's really interesting.
Thank you. I think because Lu Jie actually stayed a long time in New York as well as in London, I think he, like, the audience definitely is not only the villagers on site. He was also speaking, I'm not sure if he was here today. I told him about our event, but I think definitely he was also speaking to the mainstream and also Western, like the whole art system here. Yeah. I want to hear, is there any other comments? I'm also conscious of the time, like because we need to also have discuss another poem by Mary Jane Chen, but I think we can also welcome another maybe comment or question.
I find it interesting to read that at the end how some of the outcomes from the project enter back into the kind of mainstream biennial system. Like I think at the end.
Do you find that's also a paradox?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know how to think about it, because, you know, why it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive or one thing or another. No, it's all part of a network. But then, yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about, like, is this, there's no good or bad, but I'm just find it interesting. I mean, all I'm saying, I mean, all it shows is that it's one cannot preclude the other, and it's never kind of this sort of antagonistic relationship, but more maybe symbiotic, is that the right word, but more you know, coexistence that encourages perhaps collaboration and yeah, communication rather than competition. Or yeah, I don't know. Yeah, what do you think about it? What does anyone think about it?
I think Thomas, you also want to join?
Just responding to that, yeah, that is interesting. I'd be a tad, whilst remaining pragmatic, I would be a tad critical that it might be, and to use like a really basic piece of theory, turning something that was designed to operate against the spectacle into the spectacle. So for rather an international biennial to organize a project that was equivalent or comparable to the Long March project would be maybe a more genuine like accept or understanding of the project's aims, whereas to just try and sort of showcase elements of it might be to once again borrow symbols of art engagement. Yeah, I'm quite, yeah.
I would also add that I'm quite interested in the funding structure of this part of the, I guess, like the art world. And to say that if, you know, a very kind of localized community-based arts project is then kind of, I guess, like touring the world through a lot of these corporate sponsorships and through the biennials, it gives a kind of, yeah, a very kind of large, I guess, disparity between, I guess, like values. So it's something to think about. And I also kind of, I guess there's a lot of the communication comes through with a larger audience, but then like, how much of it does get diluted through that? And I think that also plays into like the role of the curator since, as you mentioned, like since the early 2000s, as a very kind of like neoliberal title, with like art schools kind of like adopting it in line with the art market kind of like rising. So yeah, it's an interesting piece to, I agree, it's kind of antagonistic, but something to think with.
If it's all right to add another comment before we move on, I was quite curious about the use of the job title social worker in this context.
Cultural worker, I think.
I think social worker was mentioned. Sorry if I've misinterpreted that, but
let me check. That's a good thing. One, it's this here.
I don't. Is that one that's been found? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you can go on.
So artists or curators or social workers, and I kind of feel like maybe reflecting 2008 and thinking about kind of contemporary critique of social practice, thinking about like what something like claiming a job title like social worker would mean for the project, in terms of not necessarily formal qualification, but long-term commitment to this, the social groups being worked with, what was offered, how was that understood at the time?
Yeah, I can respond to both like your comments, but I need to say like I am like a researcher like on this, so I don't stand for Lu Jie's position on this, and also I want to mention like I didn't know about this project, and so my interest started maybe from 7 years ago in it, so it became like a digging into what happened basically like a decade ago for me, and it became like one of the first thing I noticed about paradox, I think, about this project was like Bo and Angelus, you have mentioned about this. On the one hand, it is about going into alternative spaces, social spaces, and alternative art ecology, trying to establish one. But at the same time, from the start, like in the text called Curator's Words, it serves as a curatorial statement. Like in the final paragraph, the curator said, like this unrolled part was only half of the project. The other half was going back to, not going back, sorry, it's like going to exhibit in maybe 5 international museums or biennials. And I think now looking at it, I think it's part of about, it's not entirely about to establish an independent alternative ecology, but also participating as a way of to change and interact. Yeah, but I think there is one more, like still some part that was actually more about the Long March project itself as an artist, because like the whole art world is still operating on this identity level, like about who is the artist, who is the curator. And so one Long March project was invited to attend the 5th Asia Pacific Triennial in Australia. And so it was Lu Jie and also about 4 or 5 artists representing Long March project and went there. And so at that time, when I was looking at the videos, like they still have some video footage about the press release and also Q&A part. So if I am one of the audience listening to the speech, I will still identify this is the artist and they have to participate in this different way. So it's almost like when I was reading Bruno Latour, like Latour have this like different factor can be, or like non like bio element can still be identified as an actor like in this whole network. But then still like it is people who have emotions, who have interests, who will have reputation, who will have opportunities, and who will receive the reimbursement and payments for your traveling. And so I think that was the moment when I find it's a bit difficult to navigate between this conceptual level and this practical level. Yeah, because like if the most practical thing is we pay to people, not paying to, yeah, so this is still like a distribution of what is really influencing people's lives, like the faith. And also I think sorry, what is another, as a small social worker, yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing about I think in the beginning when I look into the project, I thought I used participatory art lens to understand this project because Claire Bishop's series is very influential, and also but then later I find it's not appropriate or feeling very awkward to look from that lens. Though Long March project, there are many their self-interpretation doesn't deny this like participatory or site-specific. But I think looking at the background context of the put forward of participatory art, it was highly related to the social policy, like in Europe and the US, like art is playing a social function to ameliorate like the struggles or like the contradictions between class, or having some, it's kind of receiving the public funding, because like I think it's related to how art is sponsored here, especially in UK. And but then like in Long March project, like they only stayed in one place for maybe 7 days, 6 or 7 days. And what Lu Jie have put forward in the curatorial proposal was more like I think a way of Zen for inspiration. So it was like to bring contemporary art, which was so unique and was not usually have possibilities to show in the countryside, and to surprise people, to astonish people. And then people will have the reaction like to it. And also like in the proposal, it was written that we are not sure if this will influence like their perception on what is art or what anything, but definitely there will be an influence. So I think it's very different from like the social workers. Like one, it has usually like a long-term and also responsibility to the community you're working with. Yeah. So actually this emphasis of incomprehensibility and surprise remind me more about the 1980s, when conceptual art or Western art was firstly introduced to China. No, it's not first, sorry. It's more like in a large scale introduced to China. And artists like Huang Yongping, like all the other Chinese artists, they were kind of surprised like by this Western art history. And then they became their response, very, very natural instinct response to this. Like even they cannot fully comprehend it. Yeah. So that was like my understanding of like the more unique curatorial methodology of this. It's not aimed for to help like relieve something. It's more like to surprise and bring inspirations. Yeah. I think kind of time is good for this article. We can move to the next one.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Xiaoyi. So I'd like to take over and introduce yourself and the next text.
Bo, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
So many days of Zoom and I still managed to make this mistake. Hello everyone, my name is Bo. I'm an artist and a teacher. I make films and performances. In my work, I often use fiction, music, writing, and costumes as artistic devices to navigate the socio-political, the historical, or simply what it means to be living as a human being in a technologically driven world. I often borrow tropes, aesthetic tropes from Far Eastern folklore traditions and rituals, and make works that merge the quotidian with the fantastical, the mythological, and sometimes the absurd. So that's a glimpse into my practice. And I've chosen Mary Jean's poem, The Importance of Tea, because this short poem speaks so poignantly on the experience and emotions of being an immigrant trying to assimilate into British culture. And it raises questions on the boundaries of cultural normality, what's considered normal, and identities that's linked with cultural habits. Mary Jean Chan, like me, she grew up in Hong Kong and came to the UK subsequently. And we share very similar childhood experiences of colonial Hong Kong, the education, the mindsets that have influenced deeply how we think and our view of the world. In one of her poems, she coined the phrase.
I think that person was just on. Oh, well, I wasn't on mute.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Mary Jean Chan, like me, she grew up in Hong Kong. In one of her poems, she coined the phrase Chinese with English characteristics, which I resonate a great deal. And I think she was talking about her school experience. So she went to a missionary school, so did I. And we were in missionary schools in Hong Kong. It was very English, everything was in English. And sometimes you'll be reprimanded if you caught speaking in Cantonese in the corridor by teachers. So it's very weird. Anyway, relating back to me as an artist, you know, I had a moment of awakening at some point and realized that, oh, not only my art education, but like, you know, my whole entire education has been very Western, and so it had influenced also the artworks that I've been making. And then since then, I've really thought long and hard about like my own identity and questioned the, you know, Chineseness with Englishness and the work that I make. Yeah, so perhaps I will start by reading the first 3 lines of the poem, and maybe can I have 3 volunteers that can continue reading the poem after me, and maybe each 3 lines. Yes, Thomas, Tavian, and I can't, oh, and Beth, yay. When your aunt arrived, she asked for normal tea, which to my untrained ears sounded a bit like normality. In Hong Kong, normal tea is green or white or red. It took my mind several moments to move from green to white to red to land on black.
Your aunt was flexible. Any Assam, Darjeeling or Earl Grey? We only had matcha, some loose leaf iron Buddha in the cupboard, no milk. Your aunt looked at you as if you'd failed at being British. Me as if I'd failed to properly assimilate.
After, you said I was projecting onto your aunts the fears I harbored. No matter how many years I've spent in this country, how I interpret normality, what is normal to me? You are learning Mandarin Chinese.
I see how the characters are split for you. Signifier and signified refuse to conjoin. That's what happened when your aunt asked for the normal tea. When a waiter brought white sugar for our centre green, I caught your gaze. We laughed and left the sachets unopened.
Thank you. Are there any, first of all, are there any initial thoughts? Anyone have any? Who here drinks tea? Someone wanted to say something, and I just I cut someone off. I don't know who that was.
Oh, no worries. I was thinking of the previous text. I think there's a line where it says the long march is a China without borders or beyond national borders, and I'd like this very kind of subtle transition into looking at tea, looking at the.
Yeah. Well, that line caught my attention as well when he was speaking. I found it was very romantic, like his ideas of this China without borders, and how everyone is just, you know, one big family, just so happy living a conflict-free country. So yeah, and I think it's interesting how then now we well, I mean, Hong Kong is part of China, but there's a complicated history along with it. So you know, it's a complicated country. Yeah.
I just want to share, I echo with this poem so much, like, because I was very ignorant about the English tea culture. Like, when I came to UK about over 5 years ago. Yeah, and I was very astonished when I found people add milk to tea, and I think and then that because I didn't went to people's home as a guest, so it was usually in the office. So people are drinking the so-called builder's tea, so you add milk to it, and then that was okay. So that become like a typical my stereotypical image about like drinking tea. And then like, but later I found actually there are some kanuasa, am I speaking it right? Like actually like, oh, tea here. And so I become looking, I avoid a lot of like very dark tea. So that was kind of my exploration or my cultural trip like by shopping. One is during the lockdown. Yeah. Trying to, so I can order a lot of different kinds of tea from here, especially like this one it is oolong tea. It is a Chinese oolong. But then they add like dry pineapple like into it. You know, that was like something I cannot imagine at all, like before this. Yeah.
It's very similar to me as well. In the sense of coming to the UK from the Caribbean, being 4 years old, and I think I started off hating tea. And I think the word assimilate is like so poignant here because it's something that I feel like I can't live without now. It's like I'm having like, 1 to 2, maybe 3 cups per day. And it's very much a kind of like a cultural thing, but I feel like it's like part of my identity now. So I really like the play on words it's got between, what is normal tea and then normal tea as well, because it's such a normal thing now for me to be drinking tea in the UK.
It's like Assam and assimilate.
I get your, sorry, I'm a bit slow. Now I get your pun.
I was going to add, I'm half Indian and half South African, and I grew up in London. I was born here. But I find with tea, I think it's so easy to kind of like make it into this tokenistic thing, with Starbucks making chai tea lattes or matcha becoming this like very trendy thing, and these objects which you grew up with. For example, with my mother's family in India, chai is just a really comforting thing, whereas it's become this trendy, special thing that's been commodified by people like Starbucks. And I think it's really interesting thinking about that in relation to this poem.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, growing up in Hong Kong, like when I look at all, like I see, how do I put this? Like, I feel like all types of tea is normal for me because everyone has their own. So my family, for instance, when we go for dim sum, it's like, there's a specific tea that we drink and it's Iron Buddha. The majority of my family prefer bitter tea. So whenever I would ask for the dragon pearl, they would sort of look at me like, but it's because it wasn't so much that's kind of like an internal difference, that I prefer the sort of fragrant, like less bitter tea. But then like even in my own immediate circle, like my sisters were Eurasian. One of my sisters drinks English tea all day. My other sister drinks green tea. And then, yeah, like you just said, coming here and seeing how tea kind of evolves in Starbucks to like whatever it's interesting because of course something like tea it's like if you really look into it, it really explodes into a global cartography, and of course it's contradictory and at every twist and turn perhaps.
Yeah, I like the idea that what's normal for, what's like for Xiaoyi, the oolong, the English twist of oolong adding pineapple, it becomes so exotic and becomes so throws Xiaoyi off so much, and then whereas and here normal tea is there's even no question asked, just tea, and if you deviate from that norm, then an eyebrow is raised. And I find it interesting when the poet said at the end, oh, maybe I was just projecting my own fears onto your aunt, and that also, that is quite touching in a way, because it's a kind of small details in everyday life that remind you of your own identity, or inadvertently, or maybe sometimes unwillingly.
Yeah, it's super interesting because like when they talk about the waiter bringing the sugar, right, and then laughing, that really resonated with me. And it also reminded me of when I first came to the UK, and I went with some English students to a Chinese restaurant, and the toothpicks came. And the toothpick's it's so normal in Hong Kong to just grab the toothpick and start picking your teeth on the table, but it was completely alien. And it was such an interesting moment to me, because that was such a clear, like how something so small could reverberate such a big cultural difference.
Yeah, it's the toothpick thing. It's interesting. Sometimes when you're in Hong Kong and you go to a restaurant that is more maybe a more Western, and then you can see how the waiters, there's a different different ways that you'll be served depending on what groups of friends you're with, you know, whether you speak in Cantonese or you speak English, that the toothpicks won't arrive at the table even when they're speaking even when they look Chinese and they're speaking English, the toothpick probably wouldn't arrive on that table, you know, versus, you know, it's interesting because it happened to me sometimes, you know, yeah.
I like really the idea of the normal tea as a metaphor as well. So as an Italian, I stick with the cliche that I drink a lot of coffees and not much tea. Also, I've been living here for a long time, but still on espresso. But I like the idea of the normality of this context also for the art sector, if we want to link the two texts. Because I'm part of a group called Migrants in Culture, and a lot of artists and cultural workers that are based in the UK found that there is a lot of thinking around this, what is a normality in the strategies, in the processes they're used, in the way of organizing, you know, the relationship between the curator, artist, institution. So I felt it's a very interestingly link to the previous text about how the art world still work around this idea of, you know, normality and what's normality, and why a lot of migrants that are coming to the group found that this is still a big problem or a big you know, issue, knowing what is normal, how to behave and assimilate in order to be platformed. So I don't know whether in choosing these two texts you had any of these thinking around as well.
Yeah, certainly. And so in the previous text, like one of the questions I had in my head was, okay, like in a way, Lu Jie, the curator, was also educated in the UK, and then kind of bringing ideas back to what's mainstream art scene was probably completely unknown to people in the people in mainland China. So he was kind of turning the mainstream art scene on its head in China, but with the local people perhaps not knowing the difference between what's a mainstream art scene and local art scene. So I think that's something very interesting in that, and then I often kind of ponder on you know, artists and curators going, or especially people not from the West, or like going to the West and then coming back to their home country, and bringing back what they've learned in the West. And then I often wonder how do then, when they make projects locally, can they avoid, to what extent is that a kind of bringing ideas and utilizing what they have learned in a local context versus, you know, kind of just like Lu Jie had criticized in the beginning of the text, kind of copying the West. You know, this is something that, you know, perhaps.
I think there's also something I want to highlight, like even you don't, like for example, me, like I started curating here, like from the RCA's MA and then now doing a PhD, even though like my case study is about like a Chinese, mainly about this Chinese curatorial project. But I remember so clearly one winter I came back to Beijing, and people like the friends in the art circle, I already knew them before coming to UK, and they were saying like, oh, you are educated in the West, like you are now stand for the West. And that moment like was so twisted for me. And I think I remember like I interviewed people like in the project, in the Long March project, and people were also saying like their impression Lu Jie was also, they have saying, he had saying like the big things, like the biennials, and he had no like the most advanced idea about the curating. I think that kind of twist, like even knowing like what is the center is like, trying to do experiments in the local, but still people have expectation of you being that one is so difficult to navigate sometimes.
Yeah. So your people expecting you to bring what's the Western ideas back, when you say no, I want to incorporate local identity, local characteristics in my work. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or like people are already accusing you
like
to be the center.
Can I ask if part of that accusation is about extraction as well? Like this idea that because you're coming from a Western education background, you're seeing what you can extract from the local, and then and assuming that you are doing it in order to present it back to a Western audience.
Oh, I think you hit on a very central, very important point I haven't think about. Yeah, I think that's really crucial, and I think that's actually about how people locate you in their mind. Yeah, even you locate yourself as like a shuttle, do you call it? Like shuttle between the local and the international, or you can say about to relocate back to the local. But then in people's perception, maybe you are still in a different position, or you brought another location back. You kind of, your trait is different. I'm just speaking aloud what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, speaking on that, can I share like something like I found quite interesting, like about it's also about cha and tea. So I think responding to, I think someone who just is Mala, who shared about chai, like and I came to know chai here, and I fell in love with it. But then later I realized cha is, because in my hometown in China, we call tea as cha. So actually they are similar things. And so this is actually like it's a language research. Like if cha is following the on road, how do you call it, like the Silk Road across Asia, Europe, and so it's called cha. But if it's on the sea, Silk Road, or something, migration, or how do you call it, like transportation, sea transportation, then it has the name tea. I think that's something very interesting, yeah, to me, reminded by Semina.
I was going to say about that as well. I'm a big, I work with etymology and languages quite a lot, and I know that tea comes from a particular topolect, not a dialect of Chinese languages, and cha is like the main word that we use. So in Punjabi, which is my mother tongue, we call it cha as well. And the poem seems to work. Well, it works because of tea, and therefore I don't want to kind of impose too much of a kind of, it's Eurocentric, that it only works in that kind of way. The actual idea of cha as a thing gets lost in the process. It's almost like an assimilative thing that's happening, which is exactly what the work is about as well. But you have the word assimilation in there as well. I just thought it was a nice little play on the idea of cultural adaptation and adoption, as well as an internal poem itself.
Yeah, I want to kind of like pick up on the language actually, because it says that your aunt is learning Mandarin, and that disconnect between Cantonese speaking and Mandarin learning, of filling in the gaps of like, so when I'm kind of writing traditional Chinese, I kind of find it a lot, I guess, easier than trying to kind of take away the shadows of the word and for the simplified version. And that kind of, I guess, notion of extraction is here, in that kind of, I can buy the tea I can learn the language, but always from a certain kind of like Eurocentric perspective, as you say. But there's always going to be that disconnect because it's, you know, it's not through maybe a kind of participation that is maybe more personal. So yeah, I kind of think about that a bit. It's like, yeah, you're learning Mandarin, but you still have yet another layer of connection to go through and participate with me on.
Yes, definitely. It's always been quite amusing to me when you see somebody mentioned chai as a kind of a thing that you can buy in a coffee shop now. When I see the words chai tea, that always makes me giggle slightly because it's basically saying tea twice or cha twice. That's always quite amusing.
Can I ask, like, how do you locate this poem? Like, when you can arrive, like, where are you picturing or imagining where this place is, or where arrive at which place?
In my mind, like in my mind, I have this idea that it's the poet and her partner, and then the poet's partner's aunt arrived, who's British. This is just my interpretation, that probably Mary Jean's partner is British, and her partner's aunt arrived at the place for tea, asking for normal tea.
Where is the place? Like, do you think the place is in
London?
In London.
That's what I assumed. I just assumed. I think she's based in the UK now, or London or UK. So this is how I how I read it.
It's quite interesting. Like, I kind of feel this place, like, oh, my home is basically when you arrive. I kind of feel this home can be anywhere. Like, I even picture it is in Beijing, and it seems to work, still work.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. It could be in Beijing, but then the aunt sort of, she sees the poet as someone that should have been properly assimilated and British because she spent years in Britain, and so when she asks for normality, it should be
all assuming like the poet is in the same understanding towards tea, as with her, like, even it's like in Beijing or in another different place, not Britain or not Hong Kong, it's still they are in the same knowledge system.
Yeah. And I'm interested in knowing how when her fear of not having been properly assimilated to British society, and I wonder, what do people think about assimilation, like the success of what is assimilation and how does one become successfully assimilated to the host country if you're an immigrant? And I mean, Tavian, you mentioned now you drink tea several times a day, so you then how do you find assimilation, for example, in this sense? Do you feel
I feel within Britain it's more so assimilation with language than maybe cultural things. I feel like the British in general kind of like pick up other cultures, whether or not, it's food, it's music, and lots of other things. But when it comes to language, once you kind of like what they consider to speak good English, then it's kind of like, oh, you've made it, you're now British, or that sort of thing, and less so things to do with, like I said, to do with food and drink and music and other cultural things.
Yeah, I think in my mind, like it's much more, it's very tolerant in Britain, like in my view, compared I mean, at least the kind of expectations of what you need to do in, you don't have to you don't have to cut a turkey on Christmas Day for you to be British. You can do other things and it's okay. Whereas maybe some other places they're like, oh, you're not eating our St. Lucia buns? You know, you must celebrate that day, you know. Or yeah. So
I'm curious if anyone has like any kind of like final thoughts as well between like the two texts or just the individual ones, because we're close to the end.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I had about this poem, it really comes across to me as a kind of clash of particulars or an encounter of particulars, and sort of the general frame is the encounter. So it begins with the aunt asking for the normal tea, but it ends with, when the green tea came with sugar, we laugh. So do you know what I mean? There's two poles here in a way that sort of meet in the main body, and it made me think about, you know, Lu Jie's Long March project and how he envisioned it as sort of a grounded geographical kind of framework through which to interrogate the encounters of particulars, rather than imposing a general, that the general would be the form itself.
I think that's quite interesting about like one quite important word there is in the last text is interrogate. There is like a Stefan trying to disrupt people's perception. It's also like kind of in two directions. Disrupt the local people, the Chinese people's perception of the West, as well as even that task is more important than to enrich or disrupt like the perception from like the West about the Chinese. Yeah. And like there is a kind of another link between the two texts here for me is, after reading Lu Jie's text as kind of very big, like how do you call it? It's very theoretical vocabulary. But then like it's still coming back to the experience of daily life, of this every day about having a tea together. And I think that's also kind of hinted by Mary Jane here. Like, I think the key sentence for me in this poem is the signifier, and the signified refused to conjoin. And that is like when your knowledge and your experience, even you know it, but then still like this experience kind of like stretch you into different direction almost. Yeah, or they cannot like integrate it together. It's, yeah, I'm not sure if, and I think that's what assimilation means to me. Like when there is no rupture you feel in speaking, in using this word. Yeah, but then that would be quite boring.
Well, that really resonates with like the poem, because I think if you take like the first sentence is a hard sort of, she asked for normal tea. The final sentence, well, it's laughing off the fact that you're encountering, you know, the sugar with the green tea, but in between it's an unsettling of the signifiers, right? Yeah. Because everyone has a different, like it's the question of what is that, what constitutes normal tea. So it sort of decenters tea as a center in itself.
Yeah. I think, sorry, I want to mention another thing is about this poem is very pictorial. It almost only works when you read it. When you see it, it's like if you read it aloud, it makes sense. But I think it kind of hinted there are many things that cannot be articulated out. You have to feel it. Like while reading, there are something still silent there that you have to feel, like it cannot be voiced. Yeah,
I think, and especially as you pointed out, I think reading the two texts, I think there's in the previous text there was a mention about hybridity, and as you were mentioning this kind of work of translation and somehow I feel like this poem as well makes this movement, and and I think Stephanie, you were mentioning this kind of, from the beginning, this kind of encounter with normality, while at the end there's laughter, there's a sense of relaxing, of breathing, and actually there's a sense of complicity with the, let's say, the partner or the friend. Suddenly there's an understanding, there's an unsaid understanding, and there's a hybridity that happens, right? The friend or the partner has shifted something, maybe in their being British, in their Britishness, and suddenly laughs at the white sugar, understands the significance of that. But somehow they both speak to a hybridity, but also kind of an unspoken understanding.
It's like, did the partner unassimilate? Or like there's that was not a
But that's really interesting, because it another thing that came out for me with this text and in the conversation more generally is I think that there's also a relationship to difference here. And, you know, you guys were talking earlier about, you know, what is it like in England? Is England open to cultures? I think sometimes it very easily assimilates, let's say, culture. But what happens when you're the difference? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's like, that really struck me. Like in the beginning, it's like she's asked for normal tea and she's made to feel weird that she might not have that. Whereas when, you know, again, I keep bringing up the sugar and the green tea because it's really like, it's such a big difference. Like it's laughed off. Do you know what I mean? I think that's an interesting difference as well.
Yeah.
I was also finding that line about the signifier and signified very interesting in relation as well to the above poem, where it talks about aspects of the characters containing relationship to things, like real things, as opposed to the sort of the phonetic English language that's just like idea things, and that we can make these boundaries of normality and like have things inside there. And I don't know, it's an unfinished thought, but a relationship between signifier and signified. And similarly in the previous work, in the previous text, the idea that you can signify something without actually having the thing beneath it. You can use this idea in quite a performative way. Whereas here, yeah, there's some kind of different relationship to thing and signifier.
Thank you. Should we close on up? Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here with us this afternoon. I think this is the first time we've done a reading group in the afternoon, but it's obviously we're at different times in the world, so we're very thankful for everyone who's joined us. And we've obviously come to the end of our reading group, and we would love it if you can provide us with some feedback on your thoughts about the event. And I think Samina's going to link it in the chat below so that you can actually fill out the survey. It should only be a couple of minutes. But also, as both Xiaoyi and Bo pointed out at the very beginning, their event, talk about their kind of individual research and art practice, will be upcoming in February. We haven't completely finalized the date yet, but we're looking mid-Feb, 11th, maybe 18th. So keep an eye out for our newsletter, which will have all our announcements there, and also on social media as well. And thank you all again.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. Like, I really didn't expect like such a fabulous cohort. Like, really, I didn't imagine. It's so good for me to have your insights into the text and the research. Yeah, and thank you so much, and thanks Ineva for this opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for your input. And thanks, Ineva, Tavian, Simina, organizing this.
Thank you. We'll see you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.